And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are doing another review. And this time we are going to be taking a look at season 1 of Fallout, the Amazon series based on the game franchise of the same name. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know down in the comments below what you think. Do you agree with our assessment, or do you think we're just talking out of our asses? And if there are any shows or movies you'd like us to take a look at, please remember to let us know down in the comments below. We're always checking. But Lee, how are you doing on this fine Saturday afternoon? Any allergies plaguing you at all?
No, luckily not. And I guess hopefully I don't jinx myself by saying that because I've definitely been out and about in nature quite a bit. But luckily have not encountered any issues with any allergies. So maybe this is
Yeah,
my year where I don't get bit by the allergy bug.
lucky bastard. Because I've been laid low for 2 days. It just happened all of a sudden. Because as soon as the temperatures plunged, it was like hello allergies. And well, let's just say if you were casting for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I would be a top candidate.
Yeah, well, hopefully you feel better there because I
Yeah,
know those allergies can absolutely kick some people's asses for sure. And there's
yep.
been years where like I'll feel like I'm stuffy for like a week or more before it finally clears up.
Yep, and I've got a lot of tea with me, a lot of oranges, so I'm gonna be loading up on vitamin C. Fallout came out this year, and we actually did a trailer reaction a few months ago. So I'll be sure to check that out. I'll even link it in the description below. But at that time, we did have some high hopes for the series, and having watched it, and I think in my case, I've watched it twice now. I mean,
So bye.
I mean, there. So far it hasn't really disappointed at all, has it?
No, no,
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I think it's been, I think we've been struggling with that kind of video game curse, right? I think we've seen that quite frequently where we're just kind of in that struggle of video game adaptations just not really being worthwhile. But I think we've seen that curse being lifted. And I believe that this is once again another good example of, I would say, a gaming franchise like Fallout. And I will say I have very little working knowledge of the Fallout games.
Hmm.
And for you, I think I'm going to echo the same thing. I don't believe that you're super knowledgeable about it either, right?
Yeah, it's very minimal. So,
Yes, yes. So
what I will say is the fact that I think what they did great here was the fact that they didn't try to adapt it to a certain game in the franchise. They took the general concept and kind of crafted their own world. Being faithful to what the franchise is, but also being true and doing their own thing.
yeah,
Um,
I was very happy with that. I think that was a very smart thing because, I think from the outside looking in, you always kind of run into that where, people that are fans of the series are going to probably gravitate a lot more towards it.
mhm.
I.e., something like Halo, which is, I think, the total opposite of this, that is absolutely abysmal. So I think just be able to, kind of create something allow it to be unique in its own thing without like being kind of overburdened with too much of the universe. And I think it kind of strikes a nice balance with that.
But I think an exception to that rule would be The Last of Us, because The Last of Us kind of follows the game, pretty faithfully, but it does, but it's still able to do its own
Oh,
thing.
for sure. Yes. Yeah. And
But
there's
but
absolutely
that's an
no.
exception though, not the norm.
Yeah, and totally, and that's totally fine if like future showrunners want to do stuff like that. But I think just because Fallout, there is kind of like an overarching narrative, which we'll get into. But I think a lot more of it is enjoying the world, enjoying kind of that kind of interesting humor, kind of the crazy gore stuff that we see. So I think a lot of it is just being able to kind of experience what it's like to live in the Fallout universe, and I think they capture that really well.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and take us into this 8 episode first season.
Yeah, so and I have to admit, like it absolutely started off extremely well, right? So
Hmm.
we kind of get the opening part where we see Cooper, who's played by Walton Goggins. So we see Cooper, he's kind of this character, which we'll kind of get more into as we move on. Because he has a very integral role to the story. and kind of helping provide us with a little bit of clarity about kind of the origins of everything that happens. But in essence, we get to meet Cooper, and he's with his kid, and it opens up right away with the nukes going off. And I thought that was a hell of a way to start off. I was totally drawn back by that. I knew it was going to be happening eventually, but I was very surprised that they just outright show you everything that happened. So I was curious from your standpoint. Do you think it was smart to start off like that, or do you wish they kind of let it be a little bit more of a surprise later on?
I kind of thought about it for a bit, but I really applaud them for having done that, because it kind of just gets everything out of the way. It just says, hey,
Yeah.
look, this is how the universe starts. This is where it all began. And yeah, I mean, because really, do we really need to know like what led up to to the bombs being dropped? Because we sort of get a hint about that in later episodes, but just seeing it happen, it's a very dramatic and jarring start. But I think it was a good way to kick things
Absolutely.
off.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I actually definitely side with the idea of them starting off with that. But yeah, literally the first start of this is we watch a whole bunch of nukes going off, and then we fast forward 219 years. And this is where I guess we kind of get our ultimate start to this series. And we get to meet Lucy, right? So Lucy ends up being one of our three main characters, right? So I would consider her to be, I guess, the most main, right? I think she gets the most screen time. And we get to meet Lucy, who lives in Vault 33. And we find out that within our vault, right, these are just kind of pretty much like fallout shelters, right? In essence, it was how people were, in case the world was going to end, this is where people were going for, were these vaults. And we see that she's in Vault 33. And we see that these vaults, or at least in where we're at with Lucy's vaults, we see that Vault 33 is actually connected with two other vaults. I believe it was Vault 31, 32, and 33 are all connected together in this circumstance. So, and I guess this is a good time to bring up, like, they did a fantastic job with these sets. I thought it was so cool to be able to kind of see everything. Everything felt very real. Like, it didn't feel like it was overly relied on CGI. And I think they just did a fantastic job of really just kind of taking you and bringing you into the world of the vaults.
Yeah.
How did you like? How was your experience when you got to see the vault for the first time?
I mean, I will give props to Jonathan Nolan, because the Nolan brothers are big on using practical effects as opposed to CGI. So just seeing the vaults as they are, it on the one end it shows just how eager they are to be faithful to the game, but at the same time they also want you to see that this is actually a real lived-in world. You definitely get that retro futuristic vibe from
Yes.
From the vault, and obviously that's the entire aesthetic of the show and the games, is that retro futurism. So so you're just taking bits and pieces from different time periods and just putting together to create this sort of the sort of optimistic utopia where everything's fine. And in a way you could sort of see the vault as like a character in itself, because it's giving you off this impression that yes, the bombs have fallen, civilization's destroyed, but life goes on. So you really don't have any idea that anything could be amiss in the world until later on.
Yes.
But I won't go into too much detail. I'll let you do that.
Yes, because we definitely get it, and that's such a great point, because it's just so it's very like jarring, right? Because obviously we know the world we exist in right now, and like when we experience Vault 33, it feels like almost it's like comically how over the top nice everything is.
Yeah,
right?
It's like overly quaint, basically.
Yes, yes. Like it's just such an interesting thing, and I think that kind of brings up such a great point. Is just like how, as we meet these characters, all these characters are really created by the environments that they're in, and like just because we got one that is with the Brotherhood of Steel. We have Lucy that's going to be with the Vaults, and we have the Ghoul, who is kind of existed out in the overworld during everything that happened. So
The
you see
wasteland,
how
basically.
yes, exactly. Yeah, the Wasteland. Thank you. But pretty much like you have all these characters, and they're all very much defined by the environment they lived in. And Vault 33, absolutely, I think is kind of this very it kind of creates this whole environment. Like we know that, like for instance, like they practice fighting, right? They have a shooting range. They have like all these things that you wouldn't really expect from people that are just kind of existing in this small bubble. Like, what is the purpose for you to really be able to fight and do stuff? It's not very critical for you. But obviously, in the grand scheme of things, they want to be able to go to the surface, to the wasteland, to kind of reestablish society. And in order to do that, they have to be very capable people. The other thing wow, is this sex is very it's like almost used very nonchalantly in this universe, right? I think especially for us Americans, right? I think we kind of we tend to shy away from all the sex stuff. I think people generally are a little bit uncomfortable with that, especially for us Americans compared to other parts of the world. But in this, it's like they're just out there, like they talk about sperm counts, they talk about doing cousin stuff, and really they're all about breeding pretty much, right? And that's kind of where we start off with Lucy. She's looking to find a husband, and because everyone in the vault is related, right? They kind of do this swap with the other vault in order to do something. So this is where we kind of get the whole thing started. But how did you like kind of the introduction to Lucy and just be able to see how people in Vault 33 are?
I mean, in some ways, you kind of get this vibe that everybody in the vault is naive, right? It's like
absolutely.
I mean, and which is not surprising because when you live a sheltered life, I mean, obviously there are going to be things about life that you're not going to be too, what's the right word, expertly on. And it definitely shows when she actually starts interacting with people on the surface because most of her understanding of the world is coming from books or tapes or stuff like that. So so you can't really fault her for that. But at the same time, there's this sort of quaintness to it because it's like she's so sweet, she's so innocent. You really don't want anything bad to happen to her, right?
Yeah,
but obviously,
absolutely.
So when she goes, so when she suffers her first calamity, it's like you sort of cringe a little bit because you're like, no, like she's such a sweet little girl, like this can't happen to her. And then like as she as she develops throughout the series, it's like more and more bad things happen to her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, you kind of have to learn at some point to walk on your own,
Yes.
because even in that vault environment, it's like she's basically just relying on other sheltered people to tell her, yeah, everything's fine, everything's good, we're one big happy family. when to be fair, that's all she ever knew. Another thing that I will add is I feel like out of all of the Vault Dwellers, I think Lucy is probably the most curious out of all of them, right?
Absolutely.
And Moldaver even hints at this later on. I mean, obviously, she seems to be the only person who's actually more than willing to engage with the outside world, whereas everybody else in the vault is very, very much interested in just staying in their lane. I mean, and her brother to an extent does share some of that curiosity, but it's like, it's more out of, I wouldn't say it's more out of necessity, but it's something that kind of just pushes him to kind of like learn about more about what's going on. And obviously we'll get to that later on in the episode.
Yeah,
but
I would say like for the brother, right, just to your point, right, I think a lot of his problem is he's just very fearful of it. Like he's someone that I think is very curious about what's out there, but even to his own admission, like he's just kind of, I don't want to say coward, but he very much is okay with being a part of the status quo,
right,
to a certain extent. So
But there's certain circumstances that kind of lead him to kind of like push back the curtain and see what's
Oh yeah,
behind all of that.
yes, and he kind
So
of does it in his own way with the vault, right? Within kind of
yeah,
his own safety net,
exactly.
so to speak. So, but yeah, like I think this is where kind of everything starts to get triggered. Is Lucy looking for a husband that's not her cousin, which comes up quite frequently in this. And she's they're kind of doing this trade where we find out Vault 32 had this kind of issue with the crops. Some type of blight happens. So there's kind of this trade where Vault 33 is helping, provide, some food and, seed and stuff like that to Vault 32. And Vault 32 is passing on, uh, um, I guess, a male to impregnate her because pregnancy is really critical in this society, which kind of makes sense. And it's like, when you think about it, it's like, the only way that this vault is going to survive for 220 plus years, right, is you need to have children. So it's just one of those things where when you think about it, it makes sense from that standpoint that having kids and kind of furthering that offspring is going to be a necessity in order for them to exist come the future.
I mean, it's pragmatism, basically. So
yes, very good. Yes, absolutely. So, but we find out that the people in Vault 32 aren't exactly what they seem. And this is where we meet, I guess, really our overarching antagonist, right? Who comes across as the leader of Vault 32, the overseer, and that's going to be Lee Moldaver, who ends up. We find out that she's kind of brought all these raiders, and now they're interested in taking over Vault 33. And we find out a lot of that is because Moldaver wants to kidnap Lucy's father. And I forget who's the actor that plays Lucy's father. Can you help me with that? I always forget.
Yeah, it's Kyle MacLachlan, I think.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, because the same guy who played Paul Atreides.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because I was thinking about Dune with all the Dune stuff going on. So, but yes, so thank you. So yeah, ultimately, Lee's there or Moldaver's there in order to get him. And I have to admit, like the whole like fight sequence where we kind of see this battle between the Raiders of Vault 32 and then the people that we kind of know in Vault 33. Talk about total over the top gore. Like it was totally, for me, I didn't know what to expect with it, but I just loved how totally silly and drawn out everything was. I just really enjoyed it. It was just so, I hate to say funny because we're watching people be terribly maimed, but it just was a really fun style that I thoroughly enjoyed. So what did you think of kind of the just kind of be able to see this big over the top fight sequence in the first episode?
I mean, it's very faithful to the video game. So I'll give them that because I watched it and I was like, you know what? Good on them. I mean, they're doing their own thing, but they're staying true to the ethos of Fallout.
Yes.
Which means exaggerated weapons and over the top killing.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And it was just a total blast. I really like to see it. And I think we do build up here and we get to see, right, is Lucy's proficiency in being able to kind of deal with her own situations, right? Like she's a physically capable fighter. And I'm glad that they introduced us to that now. Because we kind of get some like hints that they, study fighting, they study, marksmanship and stuff like that. So we get to kind of see that in action. And I think that was a very good thing for us to be able to see as an audience, because obviously moving forward here, right? So Moldaver ends up capturing her dad. Moldaver takes the dad up to the surface and kind of goes off to do her own thing. And Lucy ends up deciding like, hey, I'm going to go after her, even to the chagrin of the rest of the Vault people and the kind of the leadership cast that's there, right? Who are very much like, hey, you know what? We're sorry that he got captured, but that's not our problem. We need to stay here. And this is where we get to see our first character, right? She goes up to the surface and she's introduced to the wasteland for the first time. And this is where we get our first glimpse of the surface world after all the events that happened. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really our star and Lucy, and how she begins. And I'll just go ahead and say, I always liked her okie dokies. And I think kind of goes to what we're talking about earlier, where she definitely has this very kind of altruistic, very happy demeanor about her. And she very much clashes as we move forward, but we'll talk about that in the future.
I mean, she's
Uh,
very happy-go-lucky.
Yes, absolutely. That is the best way to describe her. So yeah, and that's where we kind of get our start. Is we got Lucy going to the surface, and she's going after Moldaver for her father. And we also meet another character, right? And this is going to be, and I'm going to go ahead and open up with this now because I'm sure it's going to come up throughout. We open up with Max, who's a part of the Brotherhood of Steel. And I think that for me, without giving too much away, I think Max was, and I would say by far the weakest part of the Fallout series for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let me go ahead and open up to you, right? What did you think about Max as we kind of get introduced to him here?
I mean, I think he's the most underdeveloped character because with Lucy, you get to see her grow as she travels the wasteland, and even with Howard, Cooper slash the Ghoul, you can sort of see the journey of how he went from being, this famous Hollywood actor to, becoming the cynical, devilish creature. With Max, I feel like you really don't know much about him, and they don't really go into too much detail as to how he came to be who he is, right?
Definitely not.
All you get is just this guy who, for lack of a better word, has been brainwashed by the system in which he finds himself in the Brotherhood of Steel. Because let's make no bones about it. As much as I love the Brotherhood of Steel, there is very much a cult mentality about it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So with Max, you kind of get the feeling that that everything is the same, nothing ever changes, and it reflects, and maybe that was the intention. Maybe they wanted Max to physically embody the ideology of the Brotherhood of Steel, but you don't really see much of a change or development in him, right? Apart from the fact that he apparently he just gets lucky, first where his friend Dane suffers that horrible misfortune and he gets, I guess promoted to squire, and then again when he takes the armor for himself. But other than that, you really don't see him do that much. He really doesn't add much to the storyline. In other
No,
words,
I definitely, yeah, I totally agree with you that I felt like he didn't bring a whole lot to the table. I will say for the Brotherhood of Steel, I think they needed to take some sex ed classes because they are absolutely the way that they describe I guess sex or their experience with sex is very concerning.
Mhm.
But yeah, Brotherhood of Steel definitely needs to do some sex ed classes because those people are totally screwed up with the idea of sex and I guess how they're supposed to be functioning. And
Well, let me ask
we
you
do.
this. Well, let me ask you
Mhm.
this. Did you get Mandalorian vibes from them? Because the entire time I was watching those scenes, I kept thinking they really remind me of that enclave of Mandalorians who never take off their helmets and they're like, "This is the way. This is the
That's
way."
that's actually that's the great point. I didn't really think about that, but you're right. Like there is a really strong focus put on kind of their armor, right? And we see for the most part that they're very much like, even when we get first introduced to the various like knights, right? We get to meet Max is a squire for a knight Titus.
Mhm.
And we never actually see him up until later on, right? But the whole time, there's definitely this shroud, and it's very interesting that the kind of like the mask, it kind of like it kind of changes their voice too, right? So it's very interesting. Like it feels very impersonal how these characters are kind of interacting with each other, because we, for the most part, barely see them outside their suits, because they pretty much live in it for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. Not to mention the fact that, at least for Max, right, we get to see a little bit of his origin, which we see replayed plenty of times. So after a while, it was almost like a drinking game for how many times I saw his origin. And I guess, like,
But I mean that look, but that flashback looks so familiar because you remember in the Mandalorian, whenever Mando talks about his past, you see that little kid, like,
yeah, that's true.
he's in like some sort of shelter, and like the
Yep.
Mandalorians fly down, and
Yep.
I'm like, there are just so many parallels right there, man.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I guess something good to know, right? That I guess he kind of survived one of the nukes in a fridge. So thank you, Indiana Jones. We've all mocked you for many, many years about surviving in a fridge from a nuclear blast, but it kind of feels like kind of the same thing happened there with Max. Now, of course, we don't know if, like, he was how everything kind of transpired, but I did kind of find it funny that we see his first kind of his origin starts with him coming out of a fridge.
Yeah.
It was very interesting, to say the least. So, but yeah, that's our character Max, right? We get to meet him in the first episode. And I definitely agree with you. Like, those suits look awesome, and I think the team that put that together did a fantastic job of putting together, like, legitimate suits, because I do believe that they are, like, fully, like, capable. I'm sure that there's plenty of things that they kind of did with them to make them look the way they are, but
Yeah.
absolutely was something that they created that I totally believe are very much real.
So let me ask you this: did you kind of get the feeling that Max was meant to be the comic relief? Because throughout the entire series, obviously Lucy's going through all these horrible trials and tribulations, and obviously Cooper's trying to reconcile himself with his past. You kind of get the feeling that with Max, he's sort of like this bumbling idiot who can't get anything
He
done
fails
right.
upwards. He
Yeah,
fails
exactly.
upwards.
Exactly like that one scene in Philly where he gets his foot stuck,
Yes.
in like that wooden walkway, and I'm like, was that meant to be funny? Like, am I supposed to laugh at that? Because
Mhm.
it's just so, because just like we said, like, the that battle scene at the beginning was a bit over the top with everybody getting killed. I felt like that scene in itself was like over the top humor,
Yeah, I
like it was
agree.
just trying so hard,
Yeah,
but
and I do agree with you. I felt like that's what they were trying to go for. I think the issue that I had, and I think this is one of the reasons where I just find that Max ends up being the weakest part of the show, was if he is supposed to be that type of character, it just doesn't feel like it's pulled off very well.
yeah,
I think the actor playing him, and like I said, this is not a shot against the actor at all. There's a lot of that could be directing, writing, whatever you want to have. But he just never comes across as having kind of the charm to kind of do that, right? Like, he lacks charisma big time. He absolutely feels like, if you're making a Fallout character, like, he has all of his points in strength and nothing in anything else. He's just kind of this, like, dumb, brutish type of person. We do see, some growth with him throughout that we'll get into, but yeah, it felt like that's what they're going for. Like, he was there to kind of maybe break some tension. It just never ends up, I think, working out well in his favor.
yeah.
Um, and I think, our last character, right, that we've talked about a little bit, and I liked how the first episode, it starts off with, we get to meet Cooper, Cooper Howard, and then it ends with us meeting Cooper Howard. And obviously, there's been a 219-year time skip, right? And we get to see, well, Cooper is still alive, kinda. And we see he's now a character that I think most people know him as is the Ghoul, which pretty much is a kind of, like, I guess, like, feral person. Or let me not use the term feral, right? Because there's definitely some stuff that goes on with that. But in essence, he's kind of like this kind of like person where they have to take this medication, and otherwise they kind of lose their humanity. So we get to kind of see him, and I think very good prosthetic work, right? Like, I really like that. And I think they did a good job with kind of creating this Ghoul. And he's been pretty much alive since the incident. So I think, without getting into too much detail about the Ghoul, because I don't think we get a whole lot about it, but in essence, like, they have, I don't want to say like, but almost like functional immortality in essence. Or as far as we go, there's people just been surviving for a very long time. So, but yeah, I like how we see Cooper at the very beginning, and then we kind of see what he's become later on, and obviously a lot of his story and his character is understanding kind of the origins of everything that happened. So, but yeah, I absolutely love Walton Goggins, and I think he did such a fantastic job with his role. And I think, like, for me, him and Lucy's interactions are the best part of the show for me.
There's
Where we
there's a bit of like a teacher student relationship going on
absolutely,
between the two,
yes,
because because here you have this like young naive person who pretty much gets all of her learning from books, right?
hmm,
So she sort of knows about the world, but she doesn't know the world. And then you've
yes,
got this sort of jaded, cynical figure here who could easily just as well, put two bullets in you as he is to help you out. And in a weird sort of way, he's kind of showing her the ropes of, hey, this is what life is really like here. Um, and you get that scene later on where he's taking her to that super duper mart, and she gets thirsty, and she finally drinks that irradiated water, and he's like, yeah, now you're getting it, you know.
yep, yeah, and I absolutely enjoy that, right? Because I think they very much have a balancing act, right?
Hmm.
Where Lucy needs to be able to kind of get out of that idea of her being, kind of ignorant to the world, right? Like, she's very much gullible for everything, because the only interaction she's ever have is with this, Vault 33 and the people that live there, who all have a very similar outlook to her. But it's kind of like, oh, welcome to the real world, because that's not how everyone is. But in that same token, right, I feel like Walton Goggins, both his character and his persona, he's very much lost his humanity. And I think that Lucy, in a way, kind of subtly helps him kind of regain some of that, like, hey, we need to not have this very nihilistic outlook for everything. So I think that they play very, very well off of each other.
Yeah, I think those two like make a pretty good double act
Yes,
when you look at that.
absolutely. So, but yeah, that's our kind of like introduction to it, and I would say I absolutely love the first episode. I think it totally got us introduced to the world. We get to see kind of our three main characters, and it definitely got me pumped. So, I mean, as far as first episodes go, how much did this really suck you into the story?
I mean, I'm sort of familiar with the Fallout universe, so so in my case, I was glad to see see them remain faithful to the basic premise of the story, but I also like the fact that they took it in a whole new direction while still being true to the ethos of the franchise itself. Um, Oddly enough, the thing that I really enjoyed about about the series is the fact that they used a lot of music from way back in the day. It kind
Yes,
of gives you like this old timey and antiquated feel. Like, hey, nothing's changed. Life still goes on. Here are these old timey music, but at the same time, I also like the fact that you've got this landscape that's just so nightmarish, right? I mean, and obviously it would be because it's a post-apocalyptic world, but at the same time, it's like, there's so much potential to be had, but everybody's just kind of like doing it in their own way. And I think one of
yes,
the characters even says it too. Like, everybody has an idea of how they want to save the world. They just have different ways of doing it.
yes.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes this role so interesting, right? Because you kind of have the vault people that we meet, right? They have their own idea of, like, okay, cool, how are we going to save society, right? We have the Brotherhood of Steel, who we meet through Max, and we get to see about them. And kind of they have ultimately, like, kind of this power, right? Because they have all these, like, guns and everything like that. So they might be small in number, but they obviously have a very significant impact. I think they even kind of mentioned that they're kind of like, a lot of the stuff is like remnants of like the government before it collapsed.
right.
In essence, is how they have access to all this tech that they utilize. And then we kind of see some other stuff like the Enclave, right? So